Good evening and welcome. This is the People's Platform, What a Time to Be Alive. Now, by the powers vested in him, the President appointed Ranil Wickremesinghe as the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka in pursuance of the provision in the Constitution that says, and I quote, "The President shall appoint as Prime Minister the Member of Parliament who, in his opinion, is most likely to command the confidence of Parliament." At present, Sri Lanka is in a state of emergency declared by the President, again pursuant to the powers vested in him, giving him wide-ranging powers. Now, there are three organs of government, the executive, legislature and judiciary, and it's imperative that we ensure a system of checks and balances so that no one organ of government usurps power. All this to say that parliamentary oversight is of the most crucial importance. Especially now that a state of emergency has been declared by the President, Parliament needs to be reconvened and Parliament needs to vote on the state of emergency. We're waiting for all of that to happen. Ultimately, we need a properly constituted executive legislature in order to expeditiously guide Sri Lanka on a path of economic recovery. Today's discourse on the People's Platform features two experts in international relations to navigate through this journey that Sri Lanka has to take in ensuring that we resolve our socio-economic and political issues, not just domestically, but also globally. A warm welcome to Dr. Harinda Vidanage. Good evening and welcome.
Good evening, Sonali.
And good evening and welcome to Dr. Pavitra Jayawardena.
Hello, Sonali.
Thank you for joining us. Fantastic. My first question is to Dr. Harinda. Before moving into the international relations aspect of things, I'd like to ask you, Dr. Vidanage, now there's a Prime Minister who took oaths today. There is currently no properly constituted cabinet in Sri Lanka. And there are political groups that are refusing to work with the current government. In this backdrop, speak to us about how important it is for us to get our house in order initially to ensure political stability before engaging with the international community, which is of crucial importance.
Yeah, Sonali, the country is facing what we call an internal economic and political crisis. And while we try to address that, of course, the country has to reach out to international partners, international agencies, international stakeholders, and somehow try to mitigate the effects of the crisis. So, there is no way a government can do that if there is no legitimate representation of the system within the country. So you need a functioning, of course you have a Prime Minister installed, but you need a functioning cabinet of ministers. And of course the cabinet of ministers who should be recognized by the Parliament, as you said. And so for that to, and that needs to happen very fast, because we are in we have been talking about Sri Lanka's crisis, problems for a long time, but we are actually in a grave crisis. So, and for me, the next 2 weeks are so crucial. I think if we do not mitigate the internal crisis, overcome it, we are going to a point of no return. So that crisis is as grave as it is. So I think there may be in principle issues about legitimacy, issues about who has majority, whether it's one party or one person party. But I think that political discourse has to be transcended if we are to achieve some kind of stability, because what we really need is stabilization. Of course, the protests, the political, that particular space can be occupied, the protesters can be there, but a stable government is in order, is the need of the time, of the hour actually. If not, I think most of the international connectivity will break down. Who's going to communicate, who's going to address, who's going to represent? Because in the eyes of the international community, they need people legitimacy. No you and I or any opinion leader in this country can go and represent Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka has to be represented through its mechanisms of government. So, and it's dire at the moment if we do not do so. We need to engage with the IMF. We need to engage with our other international, international organizations. We need to engage with countries. We need to be working with China, India, United States. The bilateral relationship has to be brought back. The dialogues have to commence. But for all of that, there has to be a legitimate representation. That has to be, to be put in. So if not, we are actually in a crisis. And as I always say, this is the first time I am saying it on media. We are in a point of no return. So if we mess that up, it's very in simple English, there is no second chances. We have lost our second chance.
Dr. Pavitra, one of your key areas of expertise is migration, and one of the impacts of Sri Lanka's political crisis has been the growing number of Sri Lankans who are migrating outward. So we're having brain drain on the one hand, we're also having a massive outflow of youth and other citizenry that are just migrating overseas. And that's it. Sri Lanka just cuts off all its ties officially, and we have zero engagement with these sometimes fantastic Sri Lankans who go and serve other demographics, other states, right? Speak to us about how important it is for the Sri Lankan state to officially now engage with these Sri Lankans who are change makers, influential individuals and groups, so that we can get their help in speeding up this economic recovery process.
Yeah, Sonali, first of all, thank you for that question, because this is something that we rarely speaks when we talk about internal matters of the country, about whether or not we should engage with our migrants. If so, how should we do it? Now, according to the statistics, we have about more than 1 million of Sri Lankan migrants out there who have permanently settled. Right. And on top of it, we have, as we know, labor migrants to Gulf and temporary migrants. These statistics, of course, can be controversial because collecting numbers about migrants is extremely hard. Anyway, now as you said, Sri Lanka doesn't have really very developed migration policies, except we have the dual citizenship policy, which probably is the key policy that links the state with the immigrants. But when you look at other countries like India or China, they don't even grant dual citizenship, but they have very developed migration policies to keep connected with their migrants who are living outside their, the home state. Now, there are two things. One is that, of course, we should think of, better ways to keep them in the country, because as you said, this is a country who spends a lot of money on free education and all of that, and then we don't take the benefit out of what we are investing in. But then on the other hand, those are also individualistic decisions that we cannot, by forcefully, keep them in the country if someone wants to leave, and we are living in a globalized world. So what I think is that the government of Sri Lanka should very seriously think of the ways that we keep connected with them, because this is a group of people who have a special relationship with their home country. They have a strong, at least a majority of them have a strong sense of belonging, although they don't physically live in Sri Lanka. That's what you see when you scroll down in the Facebook. Those who are living outside will always comment about what is going on in Sri Lanka. They would share their ideas, and we would say that, well, if you are not living in Sri Lanka, please don't, that's the narrative that we have in the country. But one thing that we need to accept is that this is a special group of people who have a strong special relationship with their home country. Why don't we utilize it for the development of the country? So when we make policies, I think it's important to give them the sense of recognition, because so far, even if you look at this dual citizenship policy applications and all of that, you see that there's this assumption both in the policy making level but also in the societal level that why these Sri Lankan migrants want to keep relations back with Sri Lanka is just to come back and do a business here, to invest. There's a lot of utilitarian, benefits that they're expecting, but that's at least for me it's not true. They would make, I mean, when you look at a tourism, most of the people, I mean Sri Lankan migrants, would at least try to make annual visits to Sri Lanka, or once in 2 years time. They save money when they are outside for their entire family to come back to Sri Lanka for a month or so. So there's a lot of relationship that we can see. So I think it's important to improve migration policies to give them the sense that we want you, but not just for the times that we are in crisis and we want your dollars. Not like that, but give them the sense of belonging, feeling that we recognize it.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that very interesting perspective. Speaking of remittances, Dr. Harinder, something that we've seen over the past few months especially is that remittances from our migrant workers have reduced drastically, which has also contributed to this financial crisis. How must the government now go about reversing this?
Yeah, I think what Dr. Pavitra brought out is a very interesting perspective that most people are missing in this country. That is the fact that because there's a question, right? How are we going to rebuild Sri Lanka? So there are a lot of innovative answers. Are we going to do new industries, new innovations? Yes, that is all right. But I think one of the major sources of income as well as prosperity to Sri Lanka is the connectivity we maintain with our what we call the diaspora. The diaspora can be migrants, can be labor migrants, the people who are settled. So actually one of the major powers that countries like India is harnessing is how they keep their diasporic communities connected. So one of the strengths Sri Lanka always had through very difficult times in the last few years is the fact that the remittances kept coming. If you look at the numbers, the remittances were quite stable, but the last few months, maybe half a year or nearly a year, what we saw is a serious reduction of remittances. One is that there is sometimes the word is too harsh. I feel the remittances are becoming weaponized in a way, which is that it is politicized, because there was a sense that those Sri Lankan political parties, political groups are very domestic. Some of these parties, though may not be very powerful within the legislature, has a deeper reach among the migrant groups. For example, say take the labor migrants in Korea, South Korea. Right, that's a cohort. Look at the migrants in Italy. So some of them has been in a way unionized, in a way that some of them even have went to the extreme saying, look, if the government doesn't change, we are not going to put money. Of course, that is a very powerful tool, political tool. It's more powerful than sometimes protest. But I think now it's a time that the government also should start engaging. As well as if you can't have a standoff with the Sri Lankan diaspora, one, and you can't expect to create an adversarial relationship between the state and the migrants. Number three, also the people, Sri Lankans who are living outside now should understand that they were using it as a weapon against the government. I think it's high time they also let that go, at least, because the country, if they love the country, they also have to save the country first. Of course, they can get rid of politicians they don't like in the process, but I think at the moment the country has come to a certain situation, there is no further, there is no further low we can go. So I think the diasporic imagination from both sides, from the state, from the government, as well as the people who are living abroad, if they are listening to this at some point, I think they should understand, loving the country is not just about hating the politicians, but also, you know, making sure the survival and the prosperity of this country go on. So I think it's high time that using remittances as a weapon should be at least curtailed, and remittances should start flowing, because that always has been a life source of one of the major income sources of the Sri Lankan government. And as Dr. Pavitra said, the government also should have a better way of engaging, recognizing the hard work, you know, our labor migrants put. They can be laborers in Singapore, they can be laborers in Korea or in Middle East also, or very high skilled top you know, tech community. But I think they should be given their recognition. Like, you know, India has their cards, you know, they have a special recognition for that. I think it's high time Sri Lankan economy takes in this factor seriously.
Fantastic. Dr. Pavitra, I'd like your perspectives on this next question. Sri Lanka can't manage economic recovery in isolation. It needs the assistance, guidance very strongly of its international stakeholders. If we are to take specifically Sri Lanka's geopolitical situation and the interest being displayed by regional superpowers such as India and China on the one hand, and global superpowers such as the US, it's important that Sri Lanka now manages this diplomatically on the one hand, whilst also ensuring its sovereignty. How must we go about doing this, is my question.
Right. So this has been a very popular question. No? I mean, we have always thought that, you know, how Sri Lanka, what is the best way to go about? Given up geographical location, that's a fact that we cannot change where we are located, and being a part of other countries' agendas. Well, what I think precisely is that, you know, Sri Lanka, what is lacking very evidently for Sri Lanka is that we don't seem to be clear about what we really want from all these relationships. You know, what are our, you know, interests, national interests. You know, why, if we are to get into an agreement with a particular country, let's say with China, it's important that we are very clear about what are we getting out of it, how profitable that relationship for us, because, you know, that's, you know, in this kind of a you know, landscape of the world politics, nothing is free, and even a location and our, you know, internal resources and all the potentials that we have, I think what is lacking for the country is this clear imagination of, you know, what do we really want.
Is it because we lack technocrats and experts in the relevant fields when it comes to this area?
That's definitely, I think, a part of it, because we are not sure of the plans, like long-term plans in 10 years times where we want to go, in 50 years times where we want to go, and those you know, plans and projects and all of that are, you know, seemingly changing across government to government, and so that's not really clear. So as a result, what happens is that, you know, we do international politics or we keep international relations for day-to-day purposes. You know, we go one after the other because we don't have a bigger picture.
Sure.
So this, I think, needs to be, I mean, on the other hand, people then would say that, see, Sri Lanka has been trapped in this, you know, China's, you know, whatever agenda, or, you know, India's. That's how it is. Nothing is free. I mean, everyone has their own agendas. The problem here is that, the key problem is that we are not clear of what we really want out of all these relationships.
Right.
So I think this is, if we are, I mean, we are definitely in a transitional moment in terms of the country's political culture and all of that. But so I think if we are to be better players, if we are to gain, you know, better profits, this is something that we really need to be thinking about what do we really want from all these, international relations.
Okay, great. So following up from that, Dr. Harinder, how does Sri Lanka now go about not getting hoodwinked by regional and global superpowers when engaging with them bilaterally and multilaterally? And how does Sri Lanka go about enabling economic recovery through these engagements?
Yeah, Sonali, I think what we have to understand, coming from what Pavitra said, the biggest challenges is what we call strategic vision. The way the country strategizing for the future, as well as country understanding the strategic environment. So what we are trying to understand. So let me give you a sense of the strategic environment now. So because one of the biggest challenges at the moment is because we are so now consumed by our domestic internal politics, we are kind of missing a major perspective, which is most of the the current crisis we are in is triggered by three things: energy security, food security, financial insecurity. Right? These are the three areas that Sri Lanka has hit the wall. So that is why we are sinking. We, the April 9th protests started on the backdrop of, as I always claim, the catalyst was the energy crisis. When I say energy crisis, cooking gas, LP gas, fuel, electricity. So when citizens are deprived of all three at once, that hits hard anywhere. You can be in Colombo 7, you can be in Madirigiya, it doesn't matter, that hits you hard. So it was felt. So if the government failed to provide you security across the board on those three, you're in a crisis. Then you have a food security crisis. Our food security is at a pretty low ebb. And then, of course, we are at a financial crisis. We are we are at a default now. But if this is not just a domestic crisis, this is the same crisis that is hitting the world, right? And it has been predicted since COVID-19, and of course, since the outbreak of the Ukraine-Russia conflict. There is a global energy, food security, and financial security crisis. Actually, they are saying Sri Lanka is the first, but not the last. There is an expectation that within the next 12 months, at least 12 to 14 developing countries may go for default. Because what has happened globally is that because of the crisis of COVID-19 and then, super emphasized by Ukraine-Russia conflict, world is starved of energy. World is starved of food because the world's largest wheat suppliers, Russia and Ukraine, are fighting. 1/4 of wheat is being, we are not getting. The world's second largest supplier of of oil, as well as largest supplier of oil as gas, Russia, is cutting. So what is happening is that the world is going through a crisis where a barrel of oil is exactly 52% more than it was in 2021 May. I always take this example of India. Last week of March and first week of April, Indian fuel prices were increased 15 times. 15. There was a particular week in April, the prices were increased 8 times over the week, which meant one day, morning and evening also prices were increased. So it's not just Sri Lanka's crisis. It is a crisis that is hitting us hitting the world so hard, and it is hitting South Asia very much. There are many countries which are going through power cuts, including India and Pakistan and China. So what I'm trying to say is, and then there is the crisis of food security. Most of South Asian wheat and fertilizer also came from Ukraine and Russia. So Bangladesh is having a 30% decrease. So what I'm going to tell you is, if we are living in such a landscape, just finding a solution for Sri Lanka's political crisis today is not the thing. We really have to go for an energy security plan. We never had one. Sri Lanka never had an energy security plan. That is why we have governments deciding, oh yes, we'll have a coal power plant, no, we'll have LNG power plant. So there is no coherent policy on energy. But our energy demands grows 10% every year. Electricity demand, for example. We can't service it. Now we are in the crisis. So I think at least the good thing about the crisis is at least whoever is now in charge has to take seriously that we have to look at these things for the future. So our foreign engagements, if the world is also in crisis, we have to really kind of work out how we provide energy, food, and financial stability. If not, and because the world is in crisis, that means we can always say begging bowl, but who to beg to? So we have to go through that process. We have to have a robust planning vision, and of course we have to improve our international relations. We'll discuss that as we move along, but I really want to lay out this food, energy and financial security issue, because that's really destroying us at the moment.
Absolutely, and that exacerbated with the colossal political mismanagement, which can't be ignored, has caused serious concerns for Sri Lanka and Sri Lanka's economic growth. We're going for a short commercial break. You're watching the People's Platform. We'll be right back.
A brand new year, a year of hope, a year of aspirations and people looking for inspiration.
Our software engineers, our IT expertise are, not seconding to anyone.
A proper investigation led by the CID. This will be swept under the carpet.
Understanding about the stock market, the fundamentals, the economy, that is very important.
Entire ownership of this reclaimed land as well as the governance of Port City are all under the government of Sri Lanka.
No planet, no people, no business.
Yes.
And this is the simple thing about Biznomics.
Your weekend's most profitable 60 minutes. Biznomics. Saturday and Sunday at 5 p.m.
තනිව යන්න බෑයි කියන කාරණේද අධ්‍යාපනයේදී
මම කියන්නේ ප්‍රධාන වශයෙන් සිදු වෙන දේ.
අපිට රුසියානු සපත්තුව මේ ලංකාවට දාන්න බෑ ඒක ලොකුයි. චීන සපත්තුව සීන සමාජවාදී ඒකත් හරියන්නේ නැහැ. ඒක මේ කකුලට පොඩි. අපි අපේම සපත්තුව මහ ගන්න ඕනේ කියලා.
එක්සත් ජාතීන්ගේ මානව හිමිකම් කවුන්සිලය කියලා කියන්නේ මානව හිමිකම් පිළිබඳව ලෝක පාර්ලිමේන්තුව.
අපි පරිසරය කියන්නේ දෙකක් තිබුණා.
මම ඉස්කෝලේ යන කාලෙත් මේක තුන්වන ලෝකේ රටක්. දැන් මම මැරෙන්න යන කාලෙදි තුන්වන ලෝකේ රටක්.
ආණ්ඩුව රූපාන්තරණය වෙනවා රාජ්‍ය බවට.
එත දෙකේ එත පහේදී තමයි මේ වතු ඔක්කොම නැෂනලයිස් කරේ.
එහෙමයි ධර්මශ්‍රී, රට ගැන විතරක් නෙමෙයි මම ගැනත් මම බය වෙලා ඉන්නේ.
අපනයන කවුද කරන්නේ? කවුද විශ්වවිද්‍යාලයට ගියද? කවුද අපේ ව්‍යාපාර කරන්නේ? විශ්වවිද්‍යාලයට ගියද?
Welcome back. You're with the People's Platform. We are in conversation with Dr. Harinda Vidanage and Dr. Pavitra Jayawardena. My first question is to Dr. Vidanage this time around. As you said, there's a food crisis, a financial crisis, an energy crisis. And engaging with the international community must be done diplomatically. Now, we see the manner in which China, India and the US, they have their own strategic agendas like the Belt and Road Initiative, the Indo-Pacific Strategy. How do we go about engaging with them given the current political instability?
Yeah, I think the moment you say a country's strategic aspirations. For example, China has serious strategic aspirations because, of course, it itself is seeing it as a rising power, and it of course what China has done since the current president Xi Jinping took over power in 2013 is China has been expanding its reach and connectivity across the globe. So its grand plan and strategy to connect with the world was what we call One Belt, One Road initially, and now it is rebranded as Belt and Road Initiative, which basically means connecting China through the land route of the old Silk Road, as well as that is the belt actually, and the road is the maritime Silk Road, which connects China across Indian Ocean and up to Europe. So of course China has been building infrastructure, China has been investing so much, so that of course China is not doing that for the love of the rest of the world. Of course, it is a strategic aspiration. Same way, when China was expanding, so when China was coming westward, the Americans felt that its regional and global dominance is challenged along with the Indians, and so they actually introduced what you call the Indo-Pacific Strategy under Donald Trump. It was earlier named Pivot to Asia during Obama's time, and now it has been it's been maintained by Biden administration very strongly, called the American Indo-Pacific Strategy. So basically, all of what they are saying is the Indian Pacific Oceans that Sri Lanka is also part of is the most strategically important. Some people say the heart of the future of the world. Right. So in that way, I think we are sitting on a great opportunity as well. Because we call ourselves, we have been going on the location mantra. We say we are strategically located. Even during the colonial period, the British identified Sri Lanka as the Clapham Junction. That is a Clapham Junction because the Clapham Junction was a very busy junction during British industrialization. So they saw Sri Lanka as like that. So everybody has seen Sri Lanka as a very strategically and trade-orientedly important location. But the point here is, while it can be a blessing, it is a major challenge because they all have when they are contradicting strategic aspirations converge, we have to be ready to that. Be ready for that. If not, what happens is, if we are politically unstable, if we don't have a vision of what our destiny is going to be in the Indian Ocean, we can be easily strangled to take one country's side. Right. So I think what Sri Lanka needs is a neutral Indian Ocean strategy, because we can't have an Indo-Pacific. Indo-Pacific is the way Americans see it, and we can't have a one belt, one road. But we of course can engage with all these strategies, and now the European Union also unveiled this year their Indo-Pacific strategy, and one of the unveiling was for this region was done in Sri Lanka. So for them, Sri Lanka is important. So we have to feel that we are important, but to reap the benefits of that, we should have a robust foreign policy. We should have not just a foreign policy, but we should have a robust foreign affairs, activities. So in that way, I think a weak government, sustaining weakness will not help us, because if that will lead us to serious chaos, because the Americans, the Indians, the Chinese, they are very, they are with their strategic aspirations. So what we need is to somehow carve out what I call some form of strategic autonomy. So what we lack, one is strategic vision, two is strategic autonomy. So we can't achieve either if we have an unstable government. So that is why I always tell people, yes, you have to think of, we have a lot of anti-established sentiment now in the country. We started with anti-political sentiment, now it's anti-establishment, which is very dangerous. This idea, desiya visipama epa, parliamentu epa, that is anti-establishment. It sounds right, but strategically major blunder.
Sure. So we're trying to work out how we can, through Parliament, through the 225 parliamentarians, through a powerful, empathetic, conscionable Parliament, bring in all of these policies and processes. Dr. Pavitra, I'd like to shift the conversation in a different direction and discuss public opinion in Sri Lankan politics. Now, there's a tendency among the public to sometimes oversimplify concepts and be unaware of the nuances. However, given this renaissance in public consciousness, especially among the youth over the recent past, it's important to understand how we can now correct ourselves. For example, there's a saying, we get the leaders we deserve, or the example of Kapuat Le Kola Patai, or Magisia SLFP, Ekita Mat SLFP, kind of blind sort of sentiment with no critical thinking processes behind it, which shows the stagnation. Then on the other hand, we have situations where we see the propensity of society to actually progress towards positive thinking. A recent example of where some political groups tried to create ethnic tensions in Nigambo. And the group of residents who were there at that location prevented a debacle from taking place by saying, no, do not use the race card on us. We're not falling for that again. So take us through the importance of, as a society, equipping ourselves with a multitude of perspectives, a diversity of perspectives to critically think, form informed opinions, thereby make informed decisions, especially when it comes to electing our representatives.
Right. So that's a very broad question, Sonali.
Yeah.
But to comment on it, yeah, sure, of course. I mean, this is, I think, if we are in a very transformative momentum, one of the things that we should really be thinking is as to how to make our public more conscious and more critical, because the history has proved, at least the last couple of years has proved that, you know, we should have been more critical, and we should have been, you know, asking certain demands that we're asking today earlier. We should have questioned as we are doing now a bit more earlier. You know, there's this, you know, generation gap would come out, and we presumably say that it is the youth of the country that is at the moment, you know, asking these kinds of things. Yeah, I mean, the Negombo case is very interesting, and I think that's a really good sign, because what the key narratives that Sri Lanka was having, especially after the end of the ethnic conflict, was that you know, well, all our, you know, ethnic related issues and, you know, terrorism and all that is over. Now it's clearly our direction should be towards development, and we completely had this development discourse with this very materialistic and, you know, utilitarian sort of development, and sort of, you know, even we were ready to compromise you know, human security and reconciliation and overcoming racism, overcoming you know, ethnic tensions that we really have.
Transitional justice.
Transitional justice, of course. So we have now come into a position where we certainly rethinking everything that we have done in the past, and I think a majority of this country now perhaps understand that it's, you know, these two should go hand in hand, development and, you know, this, as you said, you know, justice for people, you know, overcoming racism, all of that. So I think we should, as much as it is important to stabilize political establishments, it's definitely, I mean, paramount, important, very important to at least to let people survive, at least, you know, their basic needs. But at the same time, focusing on you know, these types of very deep-rooted issues that this society is having. And one way to do this is to be self-critical about ourselves and you know, be able to talk about the history, because what we're seemingly doing is that we don't talk about the history because it's too complicated, too painful, so we tend to somehow, you know, hide it in dark and just move out. But the history has proved that it's not possible, at least in the next couple of generations should be able to openly talk about what historical experiences this country have had. Absolutely. And, you know, who's I mean, you know, to talk about, to be self-critical.
The root causes of the conflict. Yeah,
because, you know, after 74 years we're still in the same place, talking about the same issues. That's partly because we have not been self-critical and have been falling into, you know, day-to-day political, you know, slogans and agendas and campaigns. So I take this moment, I look at it very positively, that it has that potential to really be self-critical as a society.
Perfect. We have about 1.5 minutes more. Dr. Harinda Vidanage, how must Sri Lanka now go about getting its house in order?
So Ali, one thing, cynical thing, it's not cynical, but I think I like about crisis is when you are at a crisis only, you also think of a reset. Because who would have thought a government with, you know, 6.9 million votes would face this fate? within 2 years. So that is a classic lesson for everyone in this country, that I think this round of politics, political patronage, political imagination has and must come to an end. So that is why the protests are important. But the downside of the protest and the future is that believing also in anti-establishment sentiment. The worst case was Anonymous Save Sri Lanka. This was the worst case because a lot of people didn't know what Anonymous was, but people were going around it. This was what happened with the Arab Spring of 2010. Just revisit Arab Spring of 2010. Most of the countries that started with a democratic spring, youth uprising, Libya is no more, Iraq is no more, Syria is no more, Egypt is under a worst authoritarian, I mean if you compare, Egypt can be under a more authoritarian regime than that it ousted. So most of the countries that were doing whatever they were doing that time are doing worse now. So that is because we need to have institutions at play, democratic culture at play, right? And politics through representation, politics through participation, more transparency, of course, to a certain extent, good governance. So we still need those things, whether you like it or not. The protest is a testament that we need it, but all the demands of anti-establishment, a total, changing the system sounds good. But I think what we need is a kind of a more systematic approach to reset. Everybody now, politicians, everybody knows that this system has come to an end. I think after independence, this is a moment that I think everybody now can think of a reset. Whoever is coming, it doesn't matter if the Prime Minister is he's coming for the 6th time, but I think he can't be doing what he did the last 5 times. Everybody has to have a new imagination.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much for this beautiful conversation, Dr. Harindu Idanage and Dr. Pavitra Jayawardena. Thank you for your time and thank you very much for watching us. We'll see you again next week. Good night.